Hello and welcome to the Clear Crypto Podcast. No jargon, no hype, just straight talk on what crypto and blockchain do today and what they'll do tomorrow. This is a podcast brought to you by StarkWare and Cointelegraph. Now, if the words clear and crypto sound to you like a bit of a contradiction in terms, you're in the right place. Maybe you're getting started in this world. This is a podcast where you can get up to speed. And if you're an OG, if you live and breathe this stuff already, don't go anywhere because this is a podcast for you too. And I'll tell you why. Because one of crypto's biggest challenges is how to communicate what it's all about to others without frying their brains. I guarantee with these discussions, you'll be clearer and better at doing this. I'm Nathan. I'm a journalist who's fallen into blockchain. And today we're going to be unpacking what Bitcoin is with our guest Charlie Spears of Blockspace Media. Spoiler, it's not just money. It's not just technology. We're going to be going a little deeper and talking about values and vision. First, let's loop in fellow journalist Gareth Jenkinson, managing editor of Cointelegraph, who's going to be helping us to navigate all of this. Gareth, how are you doing?
Very good, Nathan. Great to be back on another episode with you. Looking forward to today's discussion.
I want to get into a topic today that I've found really fascinating since getting into blockchain and crypto. And that's the sense that this is not just money, this is not just technology, but this is also ideas, ideals, and culture as well. Gareth, you kind of go to a load of crypto conferences, speak to some of the most interesting and eccentric people in the space. How would you kind of communicate that idea that we're not just talking about money and technology, this is culture?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to a number of different events in the industry, you get a taste of that. You can go to a Bitcoin conference and it's all Bitcoin. You can go to an Ethereum event, it's all Ethereum. You can go to a Solana event, it's all Solana. You can go to a meme coin side event and everyone's telling you their favorite meme coin of this week. And I think it really does speak to community building in this industry. Obviously, I'm a bit of a Bitcoiner and I lean towards that, but you find these different communities that all have a very strong sense of belief in the thing that they believe in. If anything, I'd just love to see a little less tribalism and a bit more support of all the different things and a bit more coming together. But I think we're slowly moving in the right direction there.
I'm really excited in a minute to introduce our guest for today, someone who I love talking to about this whole world. And if it's all sounding a bit abstract, he's really going to nail it down for you, listeners, viewers. But Gareth, I was just thinking as you were talking, so much of this, what you call crypto community, is actually online communities as well. And in many ways, I think crypto is an amazing success of building online communities because we hear so much cynicism and skepticism, people saying, oh, you know, everyone's glued to their screens all the time. People aren't interacting with each other. And I've often thought as kind of a counterpoint to that, actually, within crypto, those online communities can be really collaborative, really creative. And when you think of something like the pandemic, when we couldn't see each other face to face, a lot of people in crypto really felt they had their communities ready-made because they were actually interacting within these communities. Is that something you saw in your reporting at the time?
Yeah, definitely in the reporting, because most conferences and most in real life events just didn't happen for 2 years. So I remember specifically being at the Blockchain Africa conference in Johannesburg about 3 weeks before everything shut down, before COVID. Bitcoin crashed dramatically, and it was really just a crazy time. And, very quickly everyone was sent home and locked down. And the only place that you could find any real sense of a connection and community was online. Some of the biggest names in crypto were made during COVID as well. If you go look at all the big YouTube accounts, most of the big trading KOLs and those kind of things really made a name for themselves. And I think a lot of Bitcoin commentators and just crypto industry figures that are really big on X now. And to be honest, I'm sad that I didn't double down on that content because, a few years later, I'm trying to do that now. And I think people that really dedicated themselves to it saw a lot of growth because people were really yearning for that connection that they couldn't get at that time. So yeah, it's weird to think back on it all these years later.
Yep, fascinating stuff. So let's introduce our guest, Charlie Spears. Charlie, hello, how you doing?
Hey, Nathan. Hey, Gareth. Good to be back. Good to see you guys.
Now, for those of you wondering, who is Charlie? What does he do? Charlie is a great communicator in the Bitcoin space. He can kind of do exactly what we love to do on this podcast, which is to drill down to understand these topics in terms that anybody can really grasp. And Charlie runs Blockspace Media, which I would describe as the Bitcoin experts within the world of media. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it's a small independent media company, and we come tenured from the Bitcoin space. We've reported and done a lot of research on mining, and we also cover a lot of the technical discussion of Bitcoin. So kind of positioning as, we're pretty hardcore Bitcoiners, but we see a lot of crossovers you guys were just talking about with broader crypto. Very important to be aware of what's happening outside just Bitcoin. So
definitely. So we are at this kind of really interesting point within the crypto journey. And a lot of people are joining us and saying, I want to understand this story, getting the basics and trying to really build up their knowledge. So we've heard me and Gareth talking, as journalists do, in very general terms about this idea of crypto culture. And Charlie, you're the guy who we want to add some actual details to this. So crypto, the world of crypto, is made up of many, many people who are very much individuals. They'll always tell you they're individuals, free thinkers, not like anyone else. But there are values that bind together the crypto community. And there are values especially that bind together Bitcoiners. What are those values? How would you characterize in really straightforward terms the culture and values of Bitcoin?
So if you ask 3 different people what the core values are, you'll get 5 different answers. So it's going to be difficult to give you a straightforward answer, but there are some shared themes. Decentralization is a big one. Building a permissionless economy is another one. This world has its roots in the cypherpunk movement, which comes out of the 90s and 2000s of cryptography-minded individuals who use math and cryptography to build a more free world. And so those are common themes. We've seen a financialization in our industry, so you see kind of this bit of like a Silicon Valley effect. And then I would be lying if I said there wasn't like a speculative element. Even those of us who really enjoy some of the purity of the technology also equally enjoy some of the crazy speculation because it's kind of fun. You can take this a bunch of different ways, but that's a little TLDR on how I think the main themes and pillars of the broader crypto economy look.
Gareth, maybe you want to define a term that Charlie brought in that's really important, decentralization. Can you kind of give us a rundown of that for viewers, listeners who aren't familiar with the term?
Yeah, I think decentralization from a very high level view is anything that doesn't take a centralized authority to be the one single point of truth, right? If anything is decentralized, there should be many parts of a network or a community that keep record and hold each other accountable. If you look at the Bitcoin network nodes do that, right? So essentially little computers everywhere running a copy of the Bitcoin blockchain and all the transactions that have ever happened bundled into blocks. And they're all constantly agreeing on the latest version of that. So decentralization really comes down to removing a centralized authority being the arbiter of truth and relying on a huge network of people to keep each other accountable and honest. And that way, I think you have a much better version of the truth. And that's really the way that I see it.
Very clear. So the classic example being, if your bank decides to fraudulently change the record of your account, you're likely to not notice it. You don't have another authoritative version. But in Bitcoin, there is no one person with that authoritative ledger. Everybody has a copy of that ledger, or many, many nodes have a copy of that ledger, and everybody is constantly checking everybody else. But Charlie, we talk about this idea of decentralization, of everybody being able to get involved in running and checking. And that actually means, on the flip side, that the Bitcoin network actually runs quite slowly. That is actually a feature of the network, not a bug. And that is a very confusing concept. And I was hoping that you could outline why that is.
This, I could spend 3 hours talking about this, or I could try to tackle it in a minute or two. You have a bunch of different types of people participating in the Bitcoin consensus. You don't just have users, you have large companies, you have Bitcoin miners, the people who run the data centers, you have the developers, which are now pretty distributed all across the world. And so when you have all these people participating in this, it can be difficult to get them all to agree to change or evolve the blockchain. Right now, it feels a little bit challenging because a lot of us do want to change and evolve it. And so we have to do a lot of legwork to go across all these different parties to get them all to talk and agree. But that is the feature of Bitcoin. It's simple. You might call it the comparatively most dumb blockchain, but it's very, very good at doing the things that it's doing. It has done this for 16 years. I think it'll do it for another 16, 50, 100 years more.
Yeah, people are often confused as to why Bitcoin runs slowly, but it's a very human truth. Democracy runs slower than a dictatorship, but we still like democracy. Gareth's editorial meetings with his staff take much longer with everyone there than if he were to just write a memo and tell everyone what to do. But you still have to do that, don't you, Gareth?
100%.
So we have this blockchain, as you said, Charlie, 16 years old, running beautifully, but actually a little bit too slow or far too slow to be serving all of us for our everyday needs. And all three of us sitting here are involved in different ways in this attempt to make it more usable. Gareth, Cointelegraph, constantly reporting on initiatives to make it more usable. Charlie, you're very, very involved in various initiatives. I work at StarkWare, where there is this attempt to scale Bitcoin along with Ethereum and make it more usable. But Charlie, many people are actually confused by this term scaling. Can you unpack that a little bit and explain what we mean by scaling?
Yeah, I would differentiate making something scale from making something faster. So scale means that more people can participate in it. Right now, if everyone in the world wanted to use Bitcoin on its base layer, it's just technically not possible for everyone to fit their transactions onto Bitcoin. So when I think of scaling Bitcoin, I think of increasing the number of people who can actually access Bitcoin directly. There is discussion on scaling the types of things Bitcoin can do. And that goes alongside that, scaling access to Bitcoin. So this can be in multiple dimensions. We can have just net more users on Bitcoin. We can have net more features on Bitcoin. The developers will argue a lot over what trade-offs there are. But when I think of scaling Bitcoin, I think of empowering more individuals to access Bitcoin directly without having to go through an intermediary. Fewer people having to go through a Coinbase or a BlackRock, and more people being able to use Bitcoin, the base layer, with no trusted counterparty.
Gareth, would you say that this vision of more people using Bitcoin is part of the original vision, part of, the founding ideas of Bitcoin, or a change in the original vision? And then, Charlie, we'll get your view on that too.
I haven't read all the emails in the original Cypherpunk mailing list and all the conversations that Satoshi had with many, many influential people that form part of what Bitcoin is today. But Hal Finney, I remember one particular email talking about the future of Bitcoin, and he didn't quite say layer 2, but taking Bitcoin to a place where it becomes the central bank of the world and the base settlement layer within which everything happens. And I think that Bitcoin is very much moving in that direction. If you speak to someone like Adam Back, who invented the hashing algorithm within which Bitcoin uses, he often talks about Bitcoin being both digital gold and electronic money. And what people need to understand is, because of its fundamentals and the way the protocol works, it's very similar to physical gold in the difficulty that there is to mine it and the difficulty there is to inflate the amount of newly created Bitcoin. So therefore, it holds value over time. You can't just create more of it when there's more demand for it. At the same time, it's far more portable than physical gold is. If you have loads of gold, it's heavy, it's hard to move, there's a security cost involved in moving it around. Bitcoin is the electronic equivalent of that, and we can use the internet to transfer this value, yet the value of the thing itself is secured by the fundamentals of the network. So for me, it seems like a natural evolution. It started out as digital gold and electronic money, and it was supposed to be that. And this is why there is that shift towards scaling and different transactional capabilities that people are looking to bring onto the network to help it reach this point at which Bitcoin, the base layer, is the central bank of the world. And we use Satoshis or the Lightning Network or something else to transact with each other, buy this cup of coffee that I'm enjoying, and instead of tapping my MasterCard, I tap my wallet of Satoshi and the sats are paid, and it didn't take longer than a second and money was transferred. So I think that's a very long and short answer of where it came from and where it is today. And there's still a long way to go to make this a reality for every single person around the world.
And Charlie, you spoke about scaling, you spoke about making Bitcoin more usable by more people. But it does require some small changes to the Bitcoin code. Do you think that those tweaks are actually a departure from the vision of Bitcoin, or is that a healthy direction and one that Bitcoin's founders actually had in mind?
Well, this is a very nuanced answer, but I can be pretty general in my response. You reference like, what did the Bitcoin founders, what did Satoshi envision? And I like to make the comparison that a lot of the words that Satoshi wrote and spoke about, reviewing them today is kind of like reviewing like what the founding fathers of the US or old foundational like texts, reading those and trying to decipher what they mean in the modern world. And Bitcoin's a little bit like that. We have things that they said many years ago, and we're trying to see what that should look like today. And there's a lot that is actually open and unclear. But one thing is that when Bitcoin was originally designed, there were certain things in it that Satoshi included. And some of the proposals today suggest putting those things back in Bitcoin. So a couple of those ideas are not new. They're actually fairly old, and they're originally taken out as a cautionary measure. And now that we've had some time and Bitcoin's been around for a decade and a half, a lot of developers are saying, okay, we feel comfortable putting these back in. They allow Bitcoin to do more things. They allow Bitcoin to be in the hands of more people. And I actually think it's not clear what Satoshi intended for a lot of things. I like to say to the listener and to the viewer and the user that it's important to look at what Satoshi and the early Bitcoiners said and to respect and learn from them. But really, Bitcoin is in the hands of you, and you get to decide what Bitcoin should be just as much as someone did 15, 16 years ago. I think a lot of these are very good ideas. I think most of the popular ones today are very legitimate, and I would love to see those eventually make their way into Bitcoin.
That's a very empowering message. And as I say, in the next episode of this podcast, we're going to be talking about the very question of how exactly do you scale Bitcoin? How do you create the capacity for it to serve more people every day? But before we finish today, I want to hear from you guys, Gareth and Charlie, for our listeners, for our viewers. Help us find our way through that mass of crypto and blockchain news. Each of you give us one story that you think we should all be monitoring over the coming days. Gareth, do you want to kick off?
There's a few here that we had down to prep with. And I think a big one for me is the acquisition of Bitcoin by two very big companies, both in the United States and in Japan. In the United States, that's Strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, which is a business intelligence software company founded by Michael Saylor. And then there's Metaplanet, which is a big corporation in Japan. Both have adopted a very similar approach. They've said, hey, we are going to convert our fiat money holdings, so our dollars and our yen, into Bitcoin because we believe in the hard money properties of Bitcoin and the future value appreciation of holding Bitcoin on our balance sheet. So both companies have, in the last year, started offering a number of different financial products within which to raise debt to acquire Bitcoin. There's been a lot of question marks over this approach because there are some inherent risks in what they're doing. Some people have said that, if the price of Bitcoin drops below a certain price, it could put MicroStrategy or Metaplanet in a very difficult position where they cannot repay the debt that they've raised to acquire Bitcoin. if you go and read the finer details and spend hours and hours on X and Reddit, you'll probably see that these fears aren't as well-founded as some people claim they are. But at the end of the day, I find it massively intriguing that two very, very big companies are that convicted on Bitcoin that they're willing to take on huge amounts of debt, let alone just convert their treasury holdings into buying Bitcoin. And not that I care too much about the actual price of Bitcoin every day, but I think you will see a very substantial increase in the value of Bitcoin as more and more companies, more and more nation states kind of figure out that, hey, listen, the protocol exists, it runs the way that it runs, and there is a reason why its value is appreciating over time. It is very much digital gold and electronic money, and this is a story that I think is really important in the news cycle right now.
Definitely an important story to watch. And Gareth, if our audience just can't wait for the next episode of this podcast to hear you talking about all this stuff, they can actually catch you daily talking about the news. Tell us where we can find that.
Yeah, we've got a new daily X show called The Chain Reaction. Myself and Robert Baggs host that. We have big name guests, and we basically run through the biggest news stories of the last 24 hours, getting the relevant expert on or the person that's made the news on the show to chat about that. And it's been really successful so far. So looking forward to welcoming you if you want to come and listen.
Great. And Charlie, what's the story you think we should all be following over the coming days?
I think the main story is going to be stablecoin adoption. A stablecoin is a cryptocurrency that is pegged to a fiat currency. So one of these tokens equals $1. And this has big implications for nation states, for the US in particular, because the adoption and proliferation of stablecoins offers a lot of opportunity to the United States, particularly for our treasury and for our debt and the expansion of the dollar. So I think, one example of this is the company Tether is the most profitable company in the world. They have billions in net profit and only a handful of employees, and they can scale that dramatically. I will inject some bias here. I think that this is not really what I get excited about when I think about crypto. I did not initially imagine okay, crypto is a rails we can put the dollar on top of. But the pragmatist in me also sees that this is going to be very attractive and continue to be very attractive. So I expect this to be a controversial story and one of the leading ones over the coming years.
Okay, Charlie, before we let you go, one challenge I like to give our guests. When I was growing up, I used to love reading a book called What Do People Do All Day? Explain to children what everyone in the world does in their jobs every day. If you had to explain to my 10-year-old, what do you do all day? 60 seconds, how would you do it?
This is great. My dad and my grandfather worked in market research. And as a child, I had no idea what that was. They said, our job is to know stuff. And I would say that is actually also my job. So what does it look like? I'm in constant communication with people. I interview people. I read a lot of papers. I read a lot of research. And I take that information and I distill it and I package it into things that I can distribute back to people so they can digest and interpret those. In crypto, in Bitcoin specifically, there is a fire hose of information. So this is the most interesting and exciting place to be in research and media. But yeah, my day is spent looking at a screen, stretching, going for a run, and then thinking about what I've read.
And if people want to hear more of you on the news and on crypto, where do they go?
Anything under Blockspace Media. The Twitter handle is BlockspacePod. My particular podcast is called Bitcoin Season 2. We do a lot of the new stuff happening on Bitcoin. We have a mining podcast, a crypto technical podcast. I would recommend you go check out our newsletter at blockspacemedia.com or blockspace.media, our websites.
Thank you so much to both of you. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Thank you for listening or watching the Clear Crypto podcast, trying to get rid of the jargon, trying to get rid of the hype, and bring you straight talk on what crypto and blockchain do today, on what they're going to do tomorrow. This is a podcast brought to you by StarkWare and Cointelegraph, and edited and produced by Tonal Media. Tune in next time, and in the meantime, stay curious and stay safe.